Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Karen Marangio and with Alan Heyting, who is our PhD student from Monash, who was. We would like to present part of our 2-year project, one that considers Queensland teachers' experiences in acting a new science subject, in this case psychology, in their schools. So we think this project will interest people working in the out-of-field space, as most psychology teachers in Queensland at the moment are technically teaching out of field. And so we are now putting an out of field frame on this project, and we certainly welcome your insights and expertise.
So before we begin, we wish to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land Monash University operates and from where we are presenting today. And we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. And we pay our respects to the traditional owners of the land from wherever you may be joining us from. So the introduction of psychology as a science subject was just part of a major curriculum reform and a bold new vision for Queensland. For psychology and other subjects, this included the addition of high stakes external assessments. This was particularly challenging for psychology teachers, as psychology is limited to year 11 and 12 in Queensland and not in their foundation through year 10 curriculum. Although this is similar to other jurisdictions in Australia, it was an added pressure during the implementation period. This led there to be a number of forces stretching these teachers who are teaching psychology for the first time.
So like most other jurisdictions in Australia, the Queensland senior science subjects all share a similar framework for both curriculum and assessment. And here teachers have to submit in Queensland the school-based internal assessments well ahead of time to be certified. And then after they teach that and assess and mark, they have to submit the work, students' work again for moderation. So this was interesting, and interesting external exams in this case have been introduced now for the first time. And in science, there are 2 exams. So we were working with teachers who had gone through their school system without exams and had never taught with exams in year 12 before. And so we're now doing this major shift in curriculum reform at the same time. Furthermore, just for those of you, because I know there's some of you who have a maths specialism, the Queensland psychology curriculum includes a number of statistical tests, including the ones that I've mentioned here. And Alan and I can't find a secondary school psych curriculum in the world with an equivalent or heavier focus on statistics.
So while psychology is found in an increasing number of school curricula around the world, it is usually restricted to senior secondary school, and it's still to be accepted in other jurisdictions. Adding to psychology's marginalised place is that it often does not sit comfortably in science, nor humanities, nor health, which has real flow-on effects for the teachers who end up teaching it.
So here's just a quick overview of our project to date and our findings. You know, we have journal articles that are currently under review, so I'll just quickly talk through it. On the eve of introducing psych, we distributed an online survey. A total of 62 out of about 100 teachers completed the survey. 2/3 were technically out of field, and most of the other third were probably had content background, but I think only a couple had the pedagogy background for teaching psych. Only 8 had taught psych before. So when we examined the closed and open response items, we found that the teachers described their preparation to teach this new subject in terms of real excitement and anticipation in establishing a new subject. But there was also a very strong venting of frustration and urgency for support and time to plan, collaborate, access professional learning and curriculum materials. Only 65% of the teachers to date had been able to attend a Queensland Curriculum Authority implementation session, and just under half hadn't been able to get to a workshop related to psych yet. They desperately wanted to collaborate, so there were feelings of isolation, especially when most were the only teacher in the school, and many were in regional and rural areas across Queensland. Some felt connected with teachers informally, especially via Facebook, and some felt really disconnected from the science department, especially those who'd never taught in science before. Some were very anxious about teaching statistics and wondered if they could find teachers to help them. And shortly after that, I conducted 3 focus groups and to expand on the online survey. And these focus groups were really quite emotionally moving. They were very similar findings, only just much more intense.
So this brings us to the final phase of the project, the collaborative meetings. And all participants of stage 2 were invited to join these collaborative meetings over the first implementation period. We met at 8 points in time over the 2 years, so once per school term, and a total of 7 teachers attended these meetings consistently, where insights, supports, and challenges were shared and explored during the inaugural 2-year cycle.
So a total of 7 teachers of psych, all females, participated in this last phase of the project. They came from a mix of different backgrounds, all with teaching experience, some early careers, some very experienced, and a mix of teaching psych experience and a mix of teaching in and out of field.
Most were already working in the schools, and there was a mix of requesting or being asked by their school to teach psych. Some teachers were already in the science department, some were maths, health and PE, English, humanities, and religious education. And you can see here they came from a mix of school types and locations that took us from Brisbane right up to far north Queensland.
So at the start of 2019, all but 2 of the teachers were the only teachers in their school. By the end of 2020, as psych was taught in Year 12 and increased in popularity, all but 2 of the schools had a second teacher in it. And noteworthy, 4 of these teachers' schools now put psych as part of their Year 10 course, usually part of science, but it's interesting because it's not in the official curriculum. Now, just to save time today, we're only focusing on these particular 4 teachers, and we think that there's elements there that best represent the other 3, all 7. So as a background, I'll just quickly talk about the paper before this one. Alan and I took an ecological perspective informed by Priestley's sites of curriculum making. So curriculum policy is created at the macro level, but how to teach a curriculum is not fixed at that level. It must be developed, planned beforehand, and importantly, worked on during and seen as an ongoing process of curriculum making once teaching begins. So these sites of curriculum making are interconnected, and teachers as actors tend to move between these sites, especially the meso, micro and nano levels. So when we looked at opportunities for support and teachers' perceptions of support at these different sites of curriculum making, this is what we found.
So you can see here a summary of the themes, collaboration amongst psychology teachers, student engagement, limited guidance from the curriculum authority, various forms of support and levels of support within schools, and a heavy personal investment of resources. But today we're going to take a closer look at theme 4, the culture of support in a school, and how this affected the way the psych teachers felt like teachers of psychology. And we're doing this because this was the thing where we noticed the greatest variation between the participants. Experiences in the other sites of curriculum making and across the other themes were very similar amongst participants. So we started to wonder if this relates to the way these teachers feel like teachers of psychology.
So hence today we've re-examined our data, and we're drawing from boundary crossing research, in particular your work, Linda, which highlights the importance of understanding contexts and personal resources, and highlights a range of support mechanisms as boundary objects for teachers teaching out of field to cross boundaries to work towards feeling in field. So in all, this boundary work instills the need for a culture of support for out of field teachers within a school. And so this model, we think, is particularly pertinent to the current study, as the majority of teachers of psych are technically classified out of field. They're inexperienced at teaching psych. Around half of them are new to teaching science, and the overwhelming majority are the only psych teachers in their school.
So this led us to the 2 research questions you can see there. And to address these research questions, we examined the data using an out-of-field boundaries lens in mind and paying particular attention to the ways teachers were identifying or feeling as psychology teachers and the supportive processes and people in their schools that were enabling or inhibiting this. We considered each teacher in turn as a way to appreciate their personal backgrounds and individual school contexts.
So here, if we look at teacher A was highly committed to and worked incredibly hard and just worked incredibly hard across the 2 years. And she saw establishing psych as a way to really cement her future career. But while teachers A's confidence grew over time, it was really still very fragile. So she grew in confidence, especially as she saw how her biology and maths teaching work together with psychology. She started working effectively with another teacher in the 2nd year who helped her or taught her the stats components, but then this teacher left. And she was then challenged by a new graduate in-field teacher who she felt didn't understand the syllabus, didn't understand her school or student context, and didn't appreciate or respect the work she'd already put in over the last 18 months trying to establish this subject. So for us, it showed just how easy it can be to undermine a teacher's confidence and the need for that cultural support within a school, especially those new technically in-field teachers who are employed to, and in her case, it felt as if they were employed to fix the psychology subject because they were in-field. But this teacher was incredible, and she was stepping up and she was building a community of psych teachers in her local area. And a local area where she was the 4 schools within a 2-hour drive. So she was doing a lot of work, leadership work outside the school.
So teacher C was the head of science, and she took on this new role of being a psychology teacher with absolute gusto. She was an incredibly positive person and saw it really fit with her role as head of department, being a PE teacher, a maths teacher, and a teacher of science. And she was working in her school with a team of 3 teachers, so 3 psychology teachers, all sharing and working together, one of whom was in-field, who really took the lead. So this teacher had a real can-do attitude and was confident of her and her team's ability to deliver a thoughtful and engaging subject to her students. She had a really supportive school environment, and if anything, she was a little naive about the severity of the change in curriculum, especially around the addition of exams. By the end of the study, she recognised her role as head of science, which would likely include stepping back from this subject and allowing the other 2 teachers to take more ownership and control. So it was part of her longer term commitment, not always teaching psychology, but always promoting it. And she's likely to promote it not only at year 11 and 12, but the teaching of psychology in the younger years at her school as well.
So teacher C is interesting. This is a really highly accomplished teacher, and teacher C from the get-go was talking about quality student learning, teaching for quality student learning. She's also head of science and, as I said, accomplished biology teacher, technically in-field in terms of the content, but the trouble was she hadn't learnt that content 20 plus years ago. So it was interesting for us because she would keep saying, I feel like an absolute beginner. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like a beginner. I don't know how to teach it. I can teach biology, but I don't know how to teach this subject. And she was very open though. She was prepared for other teachers in her school to see that and invited them into her class. She did have to deal with some very negative comments like many of the other teachers in this study. For instance, psychology, that's the easy science to study. She was very committed, and by the end had another teacher working with her, although again, couldn't find that time to really sit down to plan and reflect on the subject and work together.
So our final teacher really struggled to find a sense of belonging within her school and her science department. And although she had taught psychology before in another jurisdiction, it was where psychology was classified as a humanities subject. And so she felt her expertise was not honoured or respected by her colleagues. However, even though she was lacking a culture of support within the confines of her school, she joined a network of psychology teachers from other schools within her region and found the support and camaraderie she was craving within this network. The outside support enabled her to overcome her lack of support within the school and step up to the point where she was leading others and supporting the psych teaching community outside of her school.
So finally, you know, when you put all this together, teachers saw themselves in different ways across the 2 years. So there are those multiple identities. They all saw themselves as teachers of psych, really from the get-go, because they were the new teacher of psych in their school. But also, yeah, they felt that responsibility for establishing the subject. So they saw themselves as leaders and as beginners. And interestingly, some felt, or some would tell us, you know, I'm a psychology teacher, but I teach psychology as a humanities, not as a science. Or I'm a biology teacher teaching psychology, before shifting. So some identities seem to merge over time. There's that acceptance or transformation into this new space, this boundary crossing, as they grew in experience and confidence, but particularly for those who had support within the science faculty. And so, you know, we've got a number of factors there that we've already identified. So we can look at those personal resources. They all recognise their important role in establishing a new subject in the school. They were committed. They had a sense of ownership. And it was interesting when that sense of ownership was shaken, like in teacher A, confidence was also, shaken as well, when they felt that sense of that ownership was going to be taken away just because they're an out-of-field teacher. So there's a number of things that matter, you know, what they've taught before has mattered, how they fit within that science department matters, how they work with the other new teachers of psychology mattered, in how they felt teaching psych as a in-field teacher of psych.
So we believe this study has some implications for establishing a new subject. It highlights the possibilities created by teaching out of field in terms of expanding professional identity and accessing new career paths. It also highlighted the key role a culture of support within a school can play in the successful implementation of a new subject and supporting teachers who are teaching out of field. This study calls for a more integrated approach within secondary teaching and a move away from the traditional siloing of subjects. And it also highlights the relationality of teachers' work in schools and encourages teaching teams to work together to foster a culture of support.